as AI gets better and better, it can do a lot of this stuff. This is a chart of the progress of fairly modern AI models. And you can see, for example, Gemini 3.1, GPT 5.4, 5.2, and so on. They are sitting already above PhD level performance in many disciplines already. Okay. And in fact, about 20 to 30% higher in these standardized benchmarks compared to PhD level humans. And so stuff feels like it's perhaps no longer the sole realm of humans. Then the question is, well, maybe we should focus on skills a bit more. This was a very interesting paper out a couple of years ago now. And what they did here is they got a bunch of AIs to act as various roles in a software company. And then they put these AIs in a simulated environment and got them to interact without giving them any other instructions. And what they found is really interesting. They actually found that when they got these AIs to interact, the AI agents were able to engage in communication and also collaboration. These two of the many C's that we want our students to develop skills in. Okay. And these AIs were autonomously developing and exhibiting these skills already. So maybe AI is encroaching on our skills as well. And maybe the answer is we need to do more soul in higher education. This is interesting in itself because this paper out almost 3.5 years ago now in JAMA Internal Medicine. And this particular paper took patient questions or human patient questions and then gave these questions, medical questions, to basically a chatbot, and also gave these questions over to human doctors and got the chatbot and also the human doctors to answer these questions. Then they gave the answers back to patients, and the patients had to rate the answers based on information quality and also about empathy of the response. The chart that we see on the screen is the empathy response. Okay, one group of responses scored much higher than the other group of responses. Can you guess which one was the chatbot? Which one displayed more compassion and soulfulness? It was actually the chatbot. So it's really interesting that, at the quality that AI was 3.5 years ago, the chatbot was already exhibiting compassion, empathy, much more than the human physicians were in their responses. So an interesting question for us in higher education is, well, what is fundamental? What are we actually doing here? And I think the answer is not to get rid of the stuff and the skills and only focus on the soul. I think the answer probably lies around a better balancing between these three circles. That maybe we need to focus a little bit less on the stuff and a little bit more on the skills and a little bit more on the soul as well, developing the people who we want to be these professionals of the future, all those characteristics that we listed in the first Padlet. I think being a molecular biologist, though, this molecule is not complete without a center atom. And the center atom, for me, I think, is the self. It's the idea that we need to help students develop the ability to see themselves, to learn about how to learn and learn grit and perseverance and self-regulation. I think often students learn this center idea of self despite what we do or in spite of what we do. But it's interesting because maybe we need to more explicitly be able to think about how we are developing this in our students. Okay, so a balancing of these four circles, I think, might be a way to move forward into this future. Now, what does this mean for what we do in the classroom in terms of learning and teaching? How do we actually engage our students in the act of learning through our teaching and through other activities in this world where AI is infused everywhere? Well, I want to think about it in terms of a metaphor which I've recently started to use, which is around staircases and escalators. Okay, so this is stairs in the middle and escalators on the side. I'm sure you've come across similar patterns in metro stations and train stations or shopping centers that you frequent yourself. Often it is said by people working in this AI space, people will say, isn't it silly that in universities, we tell students not to use the AI, But in work, their employers will say, why are you not using AI? We are against the very AI that students will need to engage with in the future in their workplaces. Now, I don't quite agree with that statement because I think the purpose and the point of education is very different to the point or purpose of work. Because at work, the point is to get to the top. And however you get to the top, to produce that report, to make that presentation, to give that output, that's the point. And if you take the escalators, you get there faster. Okay, so at work, the point is to get to the top. But education is different. Education, the point is the process of getting to the top. It's actually the process of taking the stairs when you need to, which is often, in order to build that cognitive or physical muscle in order to actually make it or be able to make it to the top. And we need to be very clear with ourselves and our students that there is a difference between the point of work versus the point of education. Right? We're not trying to rush people to the top in education. We're trying to help them climb the stairs so they can actually build the cognitive muscle that they need in order to reach the top for themselves when they leave us. And it's an important differentiation. This was a recent report out from some colleagues here in Australia, and they looked at what AI was doing to, I guess, our ability to climb the stairs. This idea of cognitive offloading and implications for education. What they pointed out in this literature review was that there's a lot of desirable difficulties that might be circumvented if people are taking the escalators. Okay, so these desirable difficulties are long-held concept in cognitive science and learning and teaching, that these difficulties and challenges are actually really important for learning. Okay, and we all feel that. But the question is, do students feel that, and how can we help students to understand this as well? The review also pointed out ideas around, when people use AI, they often see AI as an unobstructed answer oracle. Okay, they see it as the escalator to get to the top. And if you see AI as the escalator to get to the top, then you're going to be using it to get to the top, those quick solutions. But rather what we need in education is we need an emphasis that we need the slow climb up the stairs in order to actually build that muscle for ourselves and also for our students. But it's very tempting not to. And here's a really interesting paper also out recently, which demonstrates this idea. This was a situation where the researchers put a bunch of study participants in an environment where they had to answer puzzle questions. Okay, and the two treatments were basically some people were given access to AI and they could use AI to solve these puzzles however they wanted, and some people were given no access to the AI. What they saw in the no access people versus the AI access people is that while they had, in that middle period there, while they had access to the AI, the people who had the AI were able to have an increased solve rate, so an ability to actually solve or get to the bottom of those questions. But at the point in time of that kind of second vertical line, they removed the AI. And what you see is a significant dropping of the ability to solve the problems when the AI was removed from those people. Okay. And so they said there's actually a big difference between the performance that you see while the AI is there versus the actual learning, perhaps, or the ability that happens once the AI is removed. But I think what was even more striking about this particular analysis is a graph that was not many people thought about. And it was this observation here, that the way that you engage with AI matters. Okay? It's not just whether you use AI or not. It is actually how you use AI. And what they saw is that the people who went to AI for answers or a direct solution, they were the ones who saw the decrease in solve rate and an increase in giving up. Okay, the people who went to AI just for the answers, they took the escalator to the top. When AI was taken away, they demonstrated they didn't know anything. Okay, but the people who use AI for hints, for a bit of support, but not the direct answers, they were actually on par with the people who didn't use AI in the first place. But also remember that during the time they had AI, their performance also increased as well. So really it's about how you use it, not whether you use it. And that's really important for education and learning and teaching as well. Now, a way to think about this is to think about what happens cognitively and also what happens metacognitively when AI is around, okay, with our students, and how we can instill in our students a way to think about this so that they can actually be encouraged to climb those stairs as opposed to always take the escalators to the top. Offloading is a center thing here in this table, and offloading talks about I guess in this particular context, is speaking to a conscious decision to outsource or offload some work to an AI. Okay. So as an example, I've highlighted cognitive offloading to be asking AI to explain a concept. Now, if a student gets stuck with something, instead of struggling through or asking a friend or something, they may go to AI to explain the concept, and AI will very happily explain the concept to them, possibly like they're 5 years old, okay? And they will read the explanation and they'll think, yes, I understand this. But that's a paradox because they probably don't understand it because they haven't actually expended the cognitive energy needed to learn that thing. And so them offloading this explanation onto AI has actually degraded potentially their learning. Now, when we talk about the left column here, surrender is more surreptitious. It's more insidious. It's when we don't even realize we're giving in to AI. I've put some examples there. So accepting Google search AI summary results. You know, my kids, they're 9. They don't even know how to use Google as in click into the links. They'll just look at the AI summary these days and just say, oh, that must be the answer. And so they are surrendering their cognition over to the AI there. And it's a problem, one that I'm trying to solve. I've put in the bottom left, you see metacognitive surrender as using AI as a Socratic tutor. Now, I know it's very popular to see AI as a Socratic tutor. And people will say, well, if we're using AI as a Socratic tutor, it means that the student is still learning because they're not getting these buttery smooth explanations anymore, but rather they have to explain things to the AI because the AI is asking them questions. Now, the reason I put a Socratic tutor AIs in the metacognitive surrender here is because when an AI is a Socratic tutor, it is deciding the questions which the student needs to answer, which means the student doesn't need to do the work of thinking about the thinking. They don't actually need to go in there and actually think about what they don't know and what they do know, and do the metacognition necessary for learning. They are giving up, surrendering that metacognition over to the AI. Okay. Now, not everything in these two columns is a bad thing. You know, if a student is really stuck, okay, it's probably okay for them to go to AI to get an explanation to get unstuck. If the student needs to learn a particular concept, it's probably okay for them to use AI as a Socratic tutor. Okay, so not everything in these red columns is necessarily a bad thing all the time. But I put this there in order to kind of provoke us to think more clearly about what it is that we're giving up when we use AI in certain ways. Okay, because it's an important conversation that we need to think about and also one we need to have with our students too. On the right, we have agency. Okay, and this is talking about how we may be able to use AI in ways which are actively promoting human agency and human learning as well. So the one I've highlighted there is setting up a custom AI that you can teach. All right, so an example might be around if you're trying to learn a language, for example, maybe instead of getting the AI to translate something for you, okay, which is the offloading element, maybe you set up the AI as a conversational partner where you can practice a particular syllabus-based conversation with, okay, and in that language. And so if you can use AI and take your human agency to use it in particular ways, this might actually be beneficial for learning as opposed to detrimental. Right, so things to think about in terms of how AI is used and what we use it for. Now, we started this conversation today thinking about what this professional of the future looks like, and we spoke about lots of different things. Only some of those things were about the content knowledge. It was more about the characteristics of people. I want to revisit that question, and I'll tab back to the Padlets because I want to have a think about. I want to have a think about the next thing, which is these are the things that we've said we want the professionals of the future to be like. Okay. The next question I have for you, and I'll show a Padlet link very soon, is if this is what we want people to be like, how do they get there? How do they actually learn to become these things? Okay. So I'm going to show you another Padlet link over here. And I'd love us to think about this second question, which is, well, how does someone learn to become that professional, which you listed in the very first Padlet? So second Padlet here, bit.ly/queen02, or you can scan that QR code, and that'll take you to the second Padlet that we'll be working on. And thank you, Yasmin, for posting that into the Zoom chat. I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this one. What does it take to learn to become that professional that you mentioned in the first Padlet? Okay, some lovely ideas coming through. I'll just leave it maybe one more minute for some more ideas to come through. And we can have a chat through this as well. All right, these are some really lovely responses. What I'm seeing is, again, a lot of humanity in this. I'm seeing a lot of process, okay, as opposed to product. I'm seeing a lot of that idea of making it be okay to fail, okay, and do the hard things and possibly fail along the way, providing students that safe opportunity to be able to do that. And we know that students are really afraid of failing now these days, okay. I'm seeing a lot of mentorship and that human connection coming through here as well, okay, and encouraging that deliberate practice that comes through, the intentionality behind that as well. I'm seeing some ideas around agency, okay, which is lovely. So giving students the ability to choose for themselves and have that agency, and nurturing that curiosity that they all have. Okay, and yeah, a lot of ideas around how, as educators, we need to kind of design the environments within which they can develop this. Okay, so okay to fail, struggle but productively. Okay, focus on that process of doing things, work with other human beings, including each other and also with teachers, and be able to nurture that kind of love for learning. Right, so these are all lovely, lovely things. The question is, in our packed syllabus and packed curriculum and packed teaching and learning activities, how much of this do we actually do? If I was to speak honestly for Sydney University, you know, we have 75,000 students. You guys are a large university as well. There is not much time that we leave for much of what we're seeing on this Padlet here, is there? Well, at least it's not at Sydney. And so the question is, well, what are we doing? We know the kinds of professionals we want to build for the future in the first Padlet. In the second Padlet, we know what it will take to get there. But what are we going to be doing about that in order to actually help students get there? Okay, so a challenge, I guess, for all of us to think about. Now, this poses interesting questions for, I guess, how we design for learning. This is a picture from, let me just put it on the screen. This is a picture of stairs in Brussels. And what they did as an experiment in these stairs near a train station is they put piano keys on the stairs. And the stairs were, as you can see, right next to the escalators. And whenever people would step on those piano keys, it would make sounds, and people would enjoy the music that they would make just by climbing, going up or down the stairs. And this was a really interesting behavioral nudge because it made taking the stairs, as opposed to taking the escalators, more attractive to some people. In Japan, they did a similar thing. So this is a picture of Japanese stairs, again, stairs next to the escalators. And what they have in these Japanese stairs at subways is that they have a kilojoule, kilocalorie calorie counts, and so you're encouraged to climb the stairs because you can see the benefit in health that climbing the stairs is giving to you. Again, a behavioral nudge to convince people that it's better to climb the stairs. And for us in higher education, how do we, when the escalator is so tempting, how do we help students to recognize that taking the cognitive stairs is okay? And a lot of what we said on the previous Padlet around environments where students feel safe to fail are things that we could build in order to encourage them to actually climb these stairs as opposed to take that shortcut to the top. And because that learning, that process of learning, as we picked up in the previous Padlet, is so important. Now, obviously, we've got a challenge for us in higher education, which is around assessment and curriculum as well. And so what do we do about assessment? And it's lovely to hear that Gavin was talking before about the assessment policies and everything going out for consultation. I'm going to give you a reflection from what we're doing at Sydney University. Okay, so not necessarily telling you what to do, but reflecting on what we've done. So we've basically said, well, sometimes if you need students to climb the stairs and demonstrate climbing of the stairs, you need to remove the escalators. Okay, so you need to have situations where the escalator's just not available to them, and they need to show in front of your face that they can climb these stairs. Okay, and sometimes we may do things like, well, maybe a bit of AI is okay, and they have to show us how they might use the AI in some senses, but then come back to climb the stairs for the other. The whole idea behind this is that we need to have these designs where students can demonstrate their capabilities for us. We call this the two-lane approach to assessment at Sydney University. And for us, we have two general buckets where assessments sit in. For us, lane one, it's a very busy slide, so I'll go through it step by step. Lane one, secure assessments, are about the assessment of learning, okay, the verification of capability. And for us, these lane one assessments can do a lot of different things. For example, provide moments of feedback. They can motivate students to do work. They can signal what's important, and they can also help students engage with AI. Right. But primarily, the purpose of a lane one assessment for us is the verification of capability. And these assessments have to be done in front of us so that students can't accidentally or inadvertently use AI that we're not aware of. These lane one assessments need to be coupled with lane two assessments. And the purpose of a lane two assessment is almost everything that a lane one does except for that verification. Okay, because it's not done in front of you, and therefore you can't know for sure if it's the student actually demonstrating their capability. Okay. But what lane two assessments can do is they can allow for moments of feedback, they can motivate work, and so on and so forth. And so for us, it's the recognition that anything which is not observed in front of you I guess you won't be able to verify capability using those unobserved assessments, but you can if the students are in front of you. Okay. And so we've gone down these two-lane approach because it's kind of, it's a way that we can help our students and our faculty understand that there are going to be moments of assessment which are going to have to be secure because we need to verify that capability, but all the others which are going to be more developmental, more formative, also very useful assessments, but they're not going to be useful for verification. Okay, but both are useful and meaningful assessment types to have. Now, in the process of trying to help people think through this, I guess what we're trying to move away from is we're trying to move away from definitions like this, green light, red light, yellow light, or level 1, level 2, level 3 use. Because when you segment the use of AI into these levels, like the AI assessment scale or into traffic light systems, what you end up doing is you end up missing out on a great variety of ways that AI could be used. Okay. And the metaphor that we like using here is one of a menu. Okay. When you go to a restaurant, you sit down in the restaurant, you get presented with a menu, and the menu, you can choose as a diner anything from the menu. Okay. The waiter, their role is to help you match your appetite, match your allergies, match your your preferences to what is on the menu, but they're not going to say to you, oh, today it's a yellow light menu, therefore you can only eat the mains, okay, or only order the mains. What they do is they give you the agency to choose what you want from the menu. And in a very similar way, we need to give our students that agency and help them recognize that they do have that agency. And part of that agency is to say, well, as your waiter in the AI assessment menu, our role is to guide you to the healthier options. So we might say, for example, for assessment 1, these are the healthy options. Okay, if you use AI for these things, it will be able to supercharge your learning, okay, and not replace your learning. And for assessment 2, maybe these are the healthiest choices. So the language shifts from one of appropriate or not appropriate, or allowed or not allowed, to one of useful or not useful, or healthy or unhealthy. Because really, if the students aren't in front of us, there is no allowed, not allowed. Everything is allowed because there is no way we can tell what they do when they're not in front of us. And so we spoke in the second Padlet just then about the idea that process is important and that giving students agency is important too. And that's what this tries to do. Now, the reason we do this is because we think about what is happening in terms of education and learning. And when students do things, they undertake activities, they could learn or they may not learn. Okay. If they do learn, then we will have assessments in place in the courses, in the programs, and if they learn, then they will pass these assessments. Okay. When generative AI came about, we immediately, as a sector across the world, we immediately jumped to this conclusion. Gen AI use equals no learning equals academic integrity breach. Now, what we've been trying to do at Sydney and elsewhere is we're trying to reframe this to say, well, generative AI use does not automatically mean no learning. Okay, it doesn't mean that students will always take the escalators. They probably will, but we need to, encourage them not to. But what we're thinking is, well, maybe it's not about the AI equals integrity breach, but rather poor use of AI means lack of learning. And the lack of learning will be detected not through an academic integrity violation, but rather through a well-designed assessment. And that well-designed assessment will be failed by the student who does not learn and build that capability. And so our role shifts from being one of a police person to one of a designer, where we design these meaningful lane one secure assessments that will be able to measure if they have that capability, but also sit alongside them as they and us learn how to use AI well. Okay, so our role shifts from being one where we police and we restrict the use of AI to one where we design good assessments where we can actually, in a trustworthy way, verify capability, but also work with our students to develop their ability to use AI thoughtfully. Okay. And sometimes the thoughtful use will actually be no use of AI as well. Okay. Sometimes you just got to climb the stairs. So I'll show you two examples of AI, I guess, integrated assessments that have come from around one in the US and then one from Sydney as well. So this one is a very simple example. This was an undergraduate German course from Northeastern University. And what they did is, the coordinator thought about, well, what do I need my students to do? And the learning outcome was demonstrate skill and confidence in German. And so what they got their students to do is they basically gave their students access to Claude and gave the students a few example prompts to give to Claude such that Claude could act as a college student or a potential employer, okay, speaking in German. And so the students then had to use Claude not for getting translations out of it, but rather as a practice partner, okay? And then they had to reflect on the use of AI and how they did this. Reflection came across really strongly in our second Padlet about that process of engaging with AI, engaging in learning, and thinking about what they've done. All right, so really nice, really simple example of thinking, starting from what the learning looks like, and then figuring out whether AI can play a part in supporting that learning. Okay, not starting from what AI can do and then plugging that into learning. It's always starting from what it takes to learn, which is have a conversation, and therefore how can AI support that mode of learning. The second example here comes from Sydney University. It's a design computing subject, and the core learning outcome here was the faculty member wanted his students to be able to grab some data and tell a story with the data. Okay? And as part of this, what he did is he used to have to give to his students very simple Excel spreadsheets with very boring data, and no one enjoyed it because they didn't have the ability to do data analysis or even to produce these good visualizations in a web page. But with AI, what he was able to do is he actually, as a lane 2 assessment, he said to his students, you can use any AI you like. He even showed his students some data analysis AI tools and also some web page generation AI tools. And so he said to his students, well, you can go out now and pick any data set that interests you, okay, increasing motivation and authenticity. And his students then were able to use the AI tools to do the analysis. Then they told the story, the human story of the data. And then they rendered that into, or through other AIs, into an interactive web page that they could then submit for the assignment. What AI helped this coordinator do is the coordinator could say to his students, take the escalator for the first bit, which is the data analysis, which isn't even the learning outcome he wanted anyway, which is fine. And then take the stairs for the middle bit, which is learn to tell a human story with data. And then take the escalators for the last bit, which is make that web page. Because fundamentally, his core learning outcome was learn to tell a story with data, not learn HTML or learn SPSS. All right. So the AI actually allowed him to focus more on the core learning that was needed in his particular course. Okay. Quite an interesting example. Right. So let's have a chat about what this means more generally outside of assessment. Because I feel that there could be a little bit of rediscovery here needed. One of the reasons I was having a chat with some key hiring professionals in a very large multinational tech company last year, which is based in Sydney. And what they told me is they said, okay, well, we have, as employers, these recruitment processes that graduates need to go through. And one of the processes was we want to see how they work alongside AI to write code. And so they put the students with an AI coding tool and they gave them a hard problem. And they basically said, graduates, go and solve this problem. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to find the people who were able to think on their feet and were able to have or had high AI literacy and were able to basically code alongside AI. And they found them. Okay. The recruitment picked up on those skills that they thought that they wanted. But then they said to me, when the people started working for us, we didn't like them. And we didn't like them because they were not coachable and they were not humble. And it's interesting because what they actually wanted was they wanted more of that soulfulness in the people working with them. But what they measured during the recruitment process was just the skill. So they had a great misalignment of these circles. And it's interesting for us in universities because we say, in our graduate outcomes, graduate qualities, whatever, we say to intending students, we say, oh, well, we're going to give you a balanced education where you will learn stuff, but you'll also learn skills and you learn how to become a better person. But then when we look at our assessments, probably it looks a bit more like this. The stuff circle is massive and the skill circle a bit smaller and the self and soul possibly non-existent or very, very small, depending on discipline. At least this is the case where I come from. And so it's interesting that this misalignment exists between what the employers want, what they're measuring for, and also what we are measuring for as well. And this, I think, is the greater challenge, the more important challenge over and above what we do around assessment integrity. Because this is an existential question for us as universities. Think about, are we actually focusing on the right things? Are we valuing the right things? Are we rewarding the right things? Are we incentivizing the right things? So what we're trying to do in Australia, at least of late, is we're trying to pull together a lot of people from across different sectors to have this conversation and to try and move forward on this. This is something called the Castlereagh Statement, which we put out just a month ago. And this was born out of a frustration at the lack of coordinated action around meeting this great challenge of, are we even measuring and valuing the right things anymore? Okay, across different parts of education and also employers. And so what this Castlereagh Statement and the website's on there, if you would like to visit it, is trying to get this unified national conversation going to see if we can do better. And we need to do better because society is shifting. Employer needs are shifting as well. And if we don't shift with it, then we're going to be in trouble as a university. So as part of this particular statement, I guess we came up with, and I won't go through this in too much detail, but a number of principles which spoke to what we would like, I guess, education and training to look like in the country going forward. Things like we need to actually figure out what the human qualities are that are important, okay? And we need to be humble because we need to make sure that we don't get stuck in our old ways and that we can actually move forward, okay? We need to reconceptualize how we learn, how we teach, how we assess. And so the whole idea behind this Castlereagh Statement is really to say to people, we need to get to a place where, as a society, employers, professional bodies, accreditation bodies, higher education, schools even, we need to rethink what we actually value. Is it the stuff anymore, or is it more of a balance between stuff, skills, soul, and also the self? And if we do have that balance about what we value, are we actually measuring and incentivizing this? Because I don't think we are currently. And then once we get this figured out, how do we actually make sure that people can flow through these learning pathways all the way from kindergarten through to lifelong learning in a fairly seamless way, in a way which also helps us all to engage positively with AI as well? Because foundationally, I think the story is that the future is not yet written. Okay, the path forward is not predetermined. It's going to be shaped by the things that we do now. But if we keep doing the things that we have done for the last 10, 20 years, I'm not sure if that's going to serve our students and our institutions very well into this future, which is rapidly changing because of AI. Because I think we have a chance to shift what society values in education. And therefore, prepare our students for these lives of meaning and purpose. Now, this was a great reflection that I saw written online a year ago. And I really like this because it kind of captures the moment, what we need to do, what we need to embrace. And do you know where I saw this written? Gemini Deep Research wrote this. So with that, thank you. I think we have some time for some discussion and some questions.
Thank you very much, Danny, for that provocative. There we go. So, thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for that provocative talk, and really considering how we situate our learners in the center of the stuff, the soul, and the skills. I'm going to open it up to questions. I'll look at Yasmin for anything online. And folks, if you have any questions for Dr. Liu, just raise your hands and I will run the mic up to you. Yep.
You always need someone to get started, so I'll take that on. So when I was listening to you, one of the first things, and you were describing I'm going to call it your 3+1 model, the S's. One of the things that immediately popped into my mind was the phrase educate the whole child, recognizing that these are not children by the time they get to university. But that's something that's often sort of been associated with religious and or small private schools. And for the most part has kind of been said something that in the general public education system, we don't want to be doing anymore for all of the sort of baggage that comes around. Yeah. So that was the first thought. And I'd love to hear yours, but also tied to that, it also struck me that at least, at our institution, at our university, at others, also I was just at a presentation of another university. It was all the students talking about their clubs, about the extracurricular. And so it also struck me that the students are actually doing this. They're taking it upon themselves to do the soul and the self. And it's just not something that we are recognizing. But maybe we are doing, or the students themselves are doing a lot of those things that were mentioned in the Padlet. And so I'd be curious your thought on sort of whether or not this is something that just should be happening somewhere, because it may be happening in parallel in a way that we're not recognizing it. And so is it more important that it's being done, or is it more important that it's being done in the framework of sort of the quality assurance curriculum and being integrated into the classroom? So I'll leave you with that.
Yes. Thank you. It's a really two really good observations. In terms of the first one, the educating the whole person, and the baggage that comes with that. Ezra Klein recently wrote a column in the New York Times around scarcity. And in that column, he wrote that, once upon a time, it was that manual labor was scarce, and then machines came along and manual labor was no longer scarce. And then intellectual labor became scarce, as well as knowledge. And now what AI is doing is it's potentially making intellectual labor abundant. And therefore, the question is, what is the new scarcity? And the new scarcity may be things like care and human connection and trust and accountability and creativity and all those things that we listed on the very first Padlet. And I think what it makes me think about is our education systems need to prepare or play a very important role in preparing our students, not kids, our students, for this future. And if our education systems are not helping our students develop the capabilities to meet the new scarcity, then I think we need to think about what we're doing in informal education. And part of it might be around thinking about that whole person. Maybe not to the extent of that kind of educate the whole child, but to the extent that we need to maybe have a slight rebalancing of those 3+1s, in order to kind of meet this new scarcity. The second question around the extracurriculars and are students developing all these things anyway? I think it's definitely true, and as part of the university journey and university life, a lot of our students will be developing these things through extracurriculars, but not all of them. And it depends on which university you go to as well, if they live on campus, if they live off campus. And if you have a look at all the data that's coming in around loneliness, around social isolation coming through, especially in 18 plus people, then you see a epidemic almost of this loneliness. And it's striking because maybe we do see some students going through and learning all these or developing all these capabilities, but I think possibly maybe an increasing proportion are not engaging with this. And if they are engaging with formal education, then maybe a formal education is some place that needs to step in a little bit more than we have previously and help students develop some of these core capabilities that are so important for the future. So maybe, again, it's about a balancing of these, not to say that we need to do everything in our formal curriculum, but to say that we might need a little bit more than we have in the past.
There we go. Thank you so much. This was awesome. My question is maybe a little bit more reflective. We are in a time of fast food, fast fashion, fast thinking, fast answers, check off that to-do list. Do you have like ideas, strategies for us to slow down and hold space? Because this takes time. It's a lot easier to do the brain dump. And we're rewarded for lines on stuff. Like, what are some strategies so that we can also help slow each other down?
Lovely question. I feel this, and I don't know the solution, I think is the short answer. Because as life speeds up, everything just accelerates and you just feel that you have to keep going in order to keep up and not drown. So I really feel that question. I wonder if it is and I know this sounds like a cop-out, but I wonder if it's a societal kind of shift, that society is heading towards this efficiency and productivity at all costs. And it's interesting that I think AI has helped us to recognize that, well, yes, but maybe it's about quality. Maybe it's about humanity and not just efficiency and productivity at all costs. It'll take us a little bit as a society to, I think, really recognize this and really kind of catch ourselves in this. But until society recognizes this collectively, I don't have a good solution to that, unfortunately. It's almost like one of those collective action problems where if one person tries to slow down, then they're going to be left behind. But if everyone tries to do this and recognizes the kind of the hole we've dug for ourselves, then that's how we all get out of it. So no quick solutions, unfortunately. That's not a very good answer, unfortunately. But yes, it's a great question for us all to ponder. There is a question from Cora in the Zoom chat. I might just read it out while the microphone's being run around the room. It would seem that Lane 1 assessments may require a shift in how faculty work and use their time. When this approach is being scaled up for larger classes, are there additional resources like TAs required to make connections with each student in this two-lane approach? Yes, is the short answer. Lane 1 secure assessments are workload and resource heavy, which is why we say to our faculty, you don't necessarily need a Lane 1 everywhere. I think as faculty members, we have grown up with the impression that we need to make every assessment secure. But what generative AI has helped us or forced us to think about is, well, actually, a lot of the assessments that we thought were able to verify student capability in the past are no longer able to serve that purpose. But they serve other purposes of assessment. For example, motivation of learning, signaling where work is needed, providing opportunities of feedback. And so because the Lane 1 assessments are so resource intensive, our advice to faculty usually is think beyond the course, think at a program level. Not every single course in a particular program needs to secure every single thing. So can you work with your program team, your other course directors, in order to work out, well, across this particular program, are there particular assessments we really need to secure? And let's put our resources into those and time and effort and staffing. But for the other assessments, maybe it's okay to just let go a bit and to say to students, you have agency to figure out how you want to take the escalators or take the stairs. But at these key points in your program, we're going to take away the escalators and you're going to have to show us how you climb the stairs.
Hello. Thanks for your talk. I just wanted to push back a little on this idea of scarcity as being a model that, or something that we should be interested in extracting. It's an extractive model of, of an educational process, I think. If you're saying that the universities need to rejig themselves to suit the scarcities of the market. And I think that for the universities to be bowing down before market forces is absolutely the wrong way to be thinking about, preparing students for the future. What your model of scarcity seems to be saying, students find the places where you can, maybe you could define it even more precisely, this idea of scarcity, but it's an economic model of ideas and education which doesn't make any sense to me. There is no scarcity of ideas. There is no, we can't talk about ideas in terms of like as if they were gold resources in Fort Knox. It's like, so I know this is far more general than just the problems of AI coming into education, but yeah, I just think that this kind of like I see our university being forced to reconfigure itself according to some idea of what our provost thinks is the markets of the future, the employment markets of the future. And I think it's BS, because the students who are actually learners, who are actually thinkers, they make their way. They don't need to be, forced into a university where everything is suddenly going to STEM, and away from the arts. This is not a good model for education, and it's not a good model for training students, I don't think, for life, as you're saying. I mean, this idea of care and everything is so wonderful. If we can focus on those things, terrific. But I think that, first of all, thinking about, how the university is being forced to, universities all over North America, at least, are being forced to, and in the States, I mean, ideologically, there's all this pressure to conform, get rid of this, so-called wokeness, and we've even had our university critiqued by whoever's running the Department of War now, in the States, has critiqued Queen's University as a hotbed, a cesspool of wokeness. If you can believe that. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the next person now.
No, thank you. It's a really thank you for the pushback. I think what we're seeing in Australia, at least, we're seeing a significant massification of higher education, and people see, and students and their parents and communities seeing higher education as the portal to work. And I think that has, those market forces have led decisions, like you mentioned, from senior leaders to say, well, university needs to prepare students for the world of work. I think perhaps, again, that tension or the balance is important here to say that we need to, as a university, still preserve knowledge and critical thinking. But we also need to recognize the reality that many of our students come to us because they want to have a leg up in life and enter the workforce with particular capabilities that will serve them well. And all that booing in the US graduations has kind of reflected, I think, upon how students have recognized that the promise they were sold about go to college, get a degree, get a good job is now over almost, because AI is kind of affecting all those opportunities. And so, yes, what you said, balancing that with the reality of how students see it is an important tension that we need to hold. I picked up on your kind of STEM versus arts thing as well. And it's interesting because in this conversation, or in conversations around STEM and arts, I've often heard people say, well, therefore in this AI world, we need more people to take humanities and arts, because that is where you learn critical thinking, and you learn how to work with people, and you learn how to think more deeply about things. But then my question is, well, why aren't we doing those things in the STEM disciplines? Why are we thinking that STEM disciplines are places where you do less critical thinking, or you do less of this deep development as a person? We should do that everywhere, in every discipline that we have at university. Yes, so generally I say I agree that we should not be just pushed around by market forces, but we need to hold the tension that there are certain expectations placed upon us by students and also by the community.
No. Why don't we go to the next question and then he can't hear you. Yeah. Maybe I'll jump in and then we can get your point. Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Danny. It's Gavin. Thanks again for your time this morning and for your thoughts. I think they did obviously provoke further reflection. There's two things that I'd like to say. First is just to acknowledge the opportunity that we have to think about assessment at the program level, and just for folks around the virtual and real room that institutionally we're thinking about this. One of the biggest critiques that I've articulated about the emergence of generative AI and large language models is the lack of time and support to individual faculty members, instructors, and graduate students to undertake the important redesign components of programs and assessments. And so all to say to colleagues here, I'm aware of this, we're aware of this, and we're looking to consider what pan-institutional supports can be in place to undertake that work. And that would be a partnership largely driven by faculties and programs to engage in those conversations. But that it wouldn't simply be left to individuals to do, but we'd be having those, we'd be facilitating those conversations. So there's more to come on that, but just to say that we've heard this and are doing work on that. My real question, not I guess because that was a statement, is about productive failure. And I hear that productive failure is really important, but that at an institution like Queen's, which is highly selective, I would say, despite our efforts to increase and despite the massification of higher education, we select for students whose success in high school has often been through the articulation of high grades, where productive failure doesn't allow them to achieve what it is that they want. And the tension, I think, largely back to our earlier point, if I may, of between the idea that higher education is a place to discover oneself and find new knowledge, 1,000 flowers may bloom, versus the idea that it's a 13th grade. And that it's a pathway to future success, future employment, and that we're just a way station, at least undergraduate education is just a way station. I would say that we've selected more for the latter rather than the former, though I think the tension that we face is that we have educators here who think that the purpose of a university may be the first. And so when we talk about productive failure, the challenge is that we have learners who don't see it as productive. They see failure as just that, and an unwillingness to engage in that. And so I'm just curious if you have any insight or thoughts on what or how to facilitate productive failure in a way that doesn't disenfranchise learners.
I wonder if part of it is around and this takes time, and a reconceptualization perhaps of assessment, that a lot of the things that we spoke about in the second Padlet, for example, of how to become that professional of the future is about process. And so I wonder if the reframing of productive failure comes through the re-emergence of the process as the most important part of assessment. And so therefore, for example, having assessments which are multi-staged, have drafts and various stages put in place so that the emphasis is on growth in that process and the acceptance and the normalization of failure in that process of growth. And so it might be around giving students the opportunity to fail as part of completing an assessment. And the thing that we measure is perhaps not so much the output that they have at the end, which they're scared to fail at, but rather the growth that they can experience during it. And so it's more difficult, obviously, because we need to think very differently about how we assess, because we're looking into that kind of process or the black box of learning as opposed to just looking at the artifact at the end. But I think if we are able to reconceptualize assessment to normalize struggle, to normalize failure, to normalize iteration, that might help to move us towards that.
Thanks very much, Danny. Quick follow-up question.
Just about the division between the STEM subjects and arts and humanities. It seems like to me the arts and humanities are increasingly technologized, right? And in fact, we are sites of research that involves, some sophisticated technological methods even before AI. Certainly in music, which I teach, I teach, music in the studio. There's a whole wealth of engineering knowledge that has to be learned. There's a whole wealth of, acoustics knowledge that has to be learned. I'm teaching science, in the arts. And I think for our university to not honor the humanities and arts, and recognize that they're highly technologized places that could offer something back to the STEM people, I think that's important. Thanks.
We have a question. Oh, sorry. Also online, Danny, where someone says, you talked about a societal shift. Do you see a reason or need for socially mandated structures or limitations on generative AI?
Yeah, thank you. Two good questions. Let me think about the technologization of the arts. I think there's a lot of siloing that goes on in universities, especially large comprehensive ones like Queen's and also Sydney. In that we often think, at Sydney at least, people will say, teaching in science is very different to teaching in engineering, or even teaching in biology is very different to teaching in chemistry. But really, I think the more conversations that we can have, and this is why AI is, in a way, a catalyst for this, because you have your upcoming AI fora, where people will be sharing across the university to think about how we are addressing this kind of complication and strain of AI on teaching and learning and assessment. So I think the more sharing that we can have between different faculties and disciplines, the better, because we will be able to learn a lot from how each other are approaching this thing. Not only of engaging with AI, but also engaging with the increasing tensions that we need to deal with in higher education, and also just the increasing stresses on our students collectively as well. So yes, definitely everything you said, and let's have more conversations between faculties. To Nancy's question online about the societal shift and a reason or need for socially mandated structures or limitation of generative AI, there's a big movement in the States, I think, about resisting AI. And a lot of that is due to the environmental pressures, like the real environmental risks of generative AI, as well as the employment risks and impacts that it's having. I don't know about socially mandated structures, but I think it might be one of those things where society will emerge, expectations and ways of thinking and using AI will emerge as we work with AI as a society. One very simple example, I guess, is that it's interesting that in the past 3.5 years, I think people have gone all in with AI. They're using AI for everything now. And I think what people are starting to realize is actually this means that professionals are de-skilling, and that early career people are never skilling in the first place. And so I think society, as it recognizes this de-skilling and never skilling, is starting to think, actually, maybe we've gone too far. and therefore we need to backtrack a bit. Vibe coding and software development is a key example that as people use a lot of AI for this thing, they're realizing that actually no, the quality of code that AI produces, if you just rely on it and not use your brain, is actually pretty poor. And we need to actually scale back a bit on our overuse of AI and think more deeply about how we're using it in a critical kind of way. So I'm hopeful that perhaps it will be a self-correction in society that will happen around this.
Oh, thank you very much for that provocative response and some very thoughtful comments as to how we move forward with AI as part of our systems and experiences, and how it brings into consideration the soul, the stuff, and the skill. With this, folks, we'll draw this Q&A period to a close, and please join me in thanking both online and in person Dr. Danny Liu for a wonderful talk today. Thank you so much, Danny.